Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillahi wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome back to another session. Today we're going to be looking at the conditions.
As we mentioned before, you have the fard elements, the wajib, the sunnah and the mustahab, and so it goes down. In the prayer we have these elements, and depending on what you leave out, you can either make your prayer null and void, where you need to pray it again, or it's going to be unsound, where you need to repeat it again, or do a sajda of prostration, or it's a sunnah element where if you've left it out, you lose reward, but you don't need to repeat your prayer. So we're going to be concentrating on these one by one. We're going to start by looking at the fard elements. Now remember, we mentioned in the beginning that you can imagine this as a body. Right, so you cannot clothe a body without a body being there, and you can't have a body without a frame, right? So you need to have a solid frame. Without a solid frame, the muscles and everything else would just collapse on the floor into a mass. So you need to have a firm, perfect skeleton, and then you put flesh and muscle on that skeleton, and then you adorn it with clothes. So we need to build the foundation, the skeleton of the prayer, and if the skeleton's there, then nothing is. If the skeleton's not there, then nothing will be there. So this is kind of the metaphor that I use here when it comes to understanding this. So for example, we have the fard elements. The fard elements of the prayer, if you miss anything, your prayer becomes invalid. It's to do with validity of your prayer. If it's missed, then you need to make up your prayer again. You have no prayer. Then if we look at a wajib, what's necessary, right? Your prayer is complete, it's finished, it's valid, but you need to perform it again because you've missed out a major component of your prayer. And then you have the sunnah elements where your prayer is valid, but you've lost reward. You've taken away from the beauty of your prayer. So we're going to start by looking at the fard, and we're going to go through conditions. So this lesson we're going to have a look at the conditions, the parts of the prayer, that the prerequisites to the prayer, and then the second lesson we're going to have a look at the integrals, which are the fara'id, the fard elements that are inside the prayer. So let's have a look now. So we start by looking at the fard in a prayer. Right, as we mentioned before, a fard, it's a decisive text where there's no room for interpretation. So it's something that it's a firm command, it's something that you have to do, and if you don't do it, then it's not done. If you don't do it, you have to do it. And you're sinful if you don't do it. You must do it, and if not done, you've not prayed. Basically, you've not prayed. The obligatory acts of prayer, as I mentioned, we have the conditions and we have the integrals. The conditions are outside the prayer, and they concern the validity, the validity and soundness of your prayer is contingent on the conditions that happen before you pray. And now we're going to go through the list of what they are. They happen before you pray. And then you have what's known as the integrals, which are inside the prayer, and your prayer is contingent on fulfilling those integrals. We're going to have a look at that now. So your prayer, the whole edifice of prayer, consists of conditions and integrals. The conditions are the prerequisites that happen before you start your prayer, such as making sure your clothes are clean, your body's clean, the place of worship is clean. And then you have the integrals, which are inside your prayer, such as prostration, bowing, standing, and the like. So a condition is not the prayer, but the prayer rests on it. And an integral is what makes up the prayer. So one may not begin a ritual prayer except after having fulfilled its conditions, which are the following. This is what our author Imam Sharambululi says. Number one, being in a state of ritual purity from both major and minor ritual impurity. We mentioned this before. In order to pray, you need to be free from filth, free from major ritual impurity, which means that if you're in a state of janaba, you need to go and make the obligatory bath. And then if you happen to not have wudu, right, you've broken your wudu, then to make your wudu again. So this is the first condition before you can pray, to be in a state of raja, purity from both major and minor ritual impurity. Number two, being free from any physical filth on one's garment, body and place of prayer, except for that which is excused. You need to be free from physical filth on your body except for what's excused, and on your garment and place of prayer. Now, what's your place of prayer? Your place of prayer is where you put your forehead down, where your two hands go down, your two knees go down, and your 2 feet go down. These spots are basically my place of prayer. These places need to be clean. So generally, when we find a spot to pray, we look towards the ground, and all of it, that area, is generally normally clean. But for technical purposes, the place of prayer we're talking about here is those areas. As long as my place of prayer is clean, then I can pray. If there was some filth over here and I were to put my prayer mat over it, then my prayer mat is my place of prayer. It's clean. If I were to likewise be wearing shoes and take those shoes off and stand on those shoes, and filth happen to be on the bottom side of those shoes, I am now standing on those shoes. The shoes are not connected to me because they're separate from me. Then my place of prayer is clean. Clothing here that's connected to you, what do we mean here? We mean clothing in that which moves with one's body. So for example, say this was looser than it is, and this is connected to my body. So if I go into sujood, and this is quite billowy and flowy, and the bottom part flows to this side, and my very loose wrist, my very loose sleeve here ends up hitting some filth on this side. There's some filth next to me and it hits that. And the filth is dry, so nothing transfers, but there is filth there, right? So does that invalidate my prayer? No, it doesn't. It doesn't invalidate my prayer because first of all, that filth was dry. But if it happened to be wet and more than the excused amount got onto my clothes, then that would invalidate my prayer because the filth is now transferred. But just the mere fact that my clothing has touched filth that's outside of my prayer area does not invalidate my prayer because my prayer area is this area here, as we mentioned before. Likewise, if I've got filth on my clothes, if I've got filth on my shoes, if I've got filth on the bottom of my shoes, again, I can't pray in that because those clothes are, the shoes are part of my attire. It's what I'm wearing, so they're attached to me. They move with me. If I were to take them off and stand on them, then that's not considered being part of my attire anymore. So likewise, hats, ties, like a cloak or something, all of this is attached to me and it moves with me. Condition 3, covering one's nakedness, which is the area below the navel to below the knees for the man and the entire body except for the face, hands and feet for a woman. As we know, we mentioned before, the nakedness of a man is between the navel to the knee. And the nakedness of a woman is everything except for her hands, except for her face, and except for her feet. Now, there is an opinion that even her feet are considered part of her nakedness. So when she prays, it's best to cover her feet. Certainly in the other schools, that's the opinion. And within the Hanafi school as well, there is an opinion to cover her feet. And out of respect for the other schools, we do that. We cover our feet. But if she doesn't cover her feet, the opinion in the school holds that she's allowed to expose her hands, her face, and her feet. And one of the wisdoms behind a woman covering her feet is especially like when it comes to the wrist area of a woman and when it comes to the feet area of a woman, it allows for parts of the wrist and the ankle to be exposed during prayer. And as we're going to see later on, depending on how much is exposed, it can invalidate your prayer. Now, a question is, what if nakedness, what if you're exposed? What if you're praying and a part of you is exposed? What do you do? Right? Does it immediately break your prayer, or can you salvage your prayer? Do you carry on praying? Well, if you're praying and a part of you, so for example, a woman, part of her hair starts to show, or her hijab is unpinned, or for a man, if he's wearing an ihram, it ends up opening. Or in traditional societies where people only had one garment, and that was normally the izhar, it was normally the futa, the waist wrapper around themselves. Flimsy garment, if you don't know how to handle it, it can open. And in a situation like that, what do you do? Well, without making any drastic, erratic, fast movements, very calmly, you just adjust your scarf again, or you just adjust your wrist wrapper again, and you carry on praying, and your prayer has not broken, it's still valid. What if the skin is left exposed? What if the skin is exposed? Now, there's two things to understand here. If, for example, let's say I'm praying, and this normally happens with women more than men. It can happen with men, depending on how he's dressed himself, but it normally happens with women quite a lot, is when they pray, especially when they say Allahu Akbar, you have like, if they're wearing the very loose hijabs with nothing underneath, like a t-shirt underneath, you'll get the skin being exposed, right? And that's problematic. And sometimes you'll get parts of the ankle being exposed. That's problematic. In a situation like that, a quarter of your limb needs to be, up to a quarter needs to show. Any more than that, up to a quarter, and then your prayer is invalidated. So for example, I've got something showing here, right? I've got this much, say I've got just this much showing here, just on my right arm. This is not a quarter of my limb now, so I'm okay, right? A quarter of my limb would kind of be double this amount. So now it begs the question, what happens if you get something showing from here, something showing from here, something showing from the ankle, and something showing from the ankle? Well, in that instance, what you do is you add up. So you've got this much showing from here, this much showing from here, the same amount showing from the ankles, and you'd add it up to your shortest limb. So the shortest limb wouldn't be the shin, wouldn't be the leg, it would be the arm. So as long as all those four add up to less than what's a quarter of my shortest limb that's being exposed, then I'm okay. Women need to be very careful about their ears, because many times women wear thin scarves, and you can see their ear from the side, you can see the shape of the ear, and that can get very, very problematic also, because the ear is a complete limb in and of itself, and a quarter of the ear is a tiny amount. It's like the earlobe, right? So it's a very small amount that can be showing before you end up in problems. Just generally, before you pray, make sure that your ears are properly covered, no hair, none of your hair is sticking out, and make sure that your arms are covered, make sure that your legs are covered, and pray in a dignified, decent manner. It's not very difficult to do. Facing the actual qibla. So condition 4 is to face the actual qibla for one in Mecca who can see the Kaaba, or facing the direction of the qibla for others. So if you're in Masjid al-Haram in Mecca and you're opposite the Kaaba, then it's in your line of sight. So you'd face the Kaaba. Nobody would face that way or that way. You'd face the Kaaba. Even if you were far away from it, right, and you could see it, you could actually stand quite far from the you could actually stand in the outer precinct, right, just before the shops. And depending on, if you look through the main gate, you can still in the distance see the Kaaba. So it's line of sight. And obviously outside the mosque, they've got tiles that form a circular around the whole outer precinct, and they face towards the Kaaba. So you just orientate yourself towards the way the tiles are facing, and you're facing the Kaaba. But what if you're not in a direct line of sight to the Kaaba? How would you even find the Kaaba if you didn't know where the Kaaba was? Can you just pray anywhere and say, okay, I don't know where the Kaaba is, but Allah will accept my prayers, and you say Allahu Akbar and start praying? No, you can't do that, and your prayer wouldn't be accepted. You'd need to make sure that you know where the Kaaba is. Now, there's a few methods of doing that. One of the methods is a compass, right? Before you travel, you take a compass with you. Before the days of phones and apps, people would carry compasses on them. Now it's very easy. You've got an app, right? So you just switch your phone on and you find the Kaaba. If you happen to not be with a phone or not have a compass, another way is ask somebody, right? There's bound to be people around you. And even if they don't know where the Kaaba is, if it's a cloudy day, if somebody lives in that area, they may even know where the sun is, right? So just ask and say, where would the sun be at this time? And people in orientation to their house normally know at what time of day where the sun is. So then from that you can work out. So it brings it on to the next way of finding out. Look at the sun. Look at where the sun is. And then think to yourself, okay, well, in my house, when I pray, at Asr time, I remember this is my qibla, and the sun is normally here during Asr. Right, so this is the sun, this is the qibla. So now I'm in the open, and again the sun's kind of here, so that means my qibla would be here, right? So it's pretty straightforward to do for Dhuhr, Asr and Maghrib. It's straightforward to know which way to face if you can see the sun. And then to think, right? To think, if nobody's there to answer you, nobody knows if it's cloudy, try your best. Let's see, I'm about 2 miles away from home, 3 miles away from home. Now, where is home? Home is kind of that way, right? So if a mental map, this is the street, it goes back 2-3 miles, I'll turn this way and that way, And okay, so that means my house is facing this way. So if my house faces this way, I remember the Kaaba is this way, and the sun now is that way. So okay, so this is the prayer time. This is the Qibla direction. It is actually quite simple to work out which way the Qibla is. And it's also very interesting that in England, they have satellite dishes that faced southeast. So just look at houses. Some houses still have. I mean, most houses don't use them anymore. But this was for like probably about 10 years ago when houses had satellite dishes. You'd look towards the satellite dish and that would generally be facing. And why is that? Because the satellite that orbits above in the sky kind of orbits in a geo orbit that is aligned where it goes kind of over southeast, right? So it goes over Mecca. So that's why you kind of face that way. It would be the east from anywhere which is west of Mecca. So you have a 45-degree vista. For example, I know I've done my calculations, I can see the sun and everything, and I know the Kaaba is this way. I know it's this way. But can I be 100% sure? Am I spot on like if I were at Mecca facing the Kaaba? No. So what we have then is known as a 45-degree vista, right? It's a 90-degree angle, right? So it's 45 degrees this way, 45 degrees this way to your right and your left, and that is the vista I can pray in. So if the Qibla happened to be here, right, and I'm praying this way, it's within my vista, right? So I can do that once I've made all the educated guesses, and then I have this 45-degree vista. If told after the prayer that it was the wrong direction, then it's valid. So if after having taken all these means, because remember, Islam is about taking the means, right? You've taken all your worship is all about taking the means. So you've taken all the means, and then you've seen somebody says to you after the prayer, or you came to know after the prayer, oh my gosh, it was actually this way. You do not need to repeat your prayer. Your prayer is valid and sound because you took the means and you prayed. Number 5, the entrance of the prayer time as well as conviction or strong likelihood that the time has entered. The time must have actually have started, otherwise invalid. So in this situation, I can't merely say, well, I'm going to pray now, Asr, not sure about the time, but I do believe it may have started. Am I sure? No, I can't really say either way really, I'm not sure, but it must have started. Allahu Akbar. No, in that situation, your prayer is null and void, invalid. You need to know with reasonable surety that the prayer time has started. How will you know that? If you're someone that doesn't use an app, doesn't use a timetable, you will generally know every day. So you know, for example, Asr is at 6:45 in the summer. In April, it's around about that time. So the day after it would be 6:47, and then 6:49, and then 6:51, like that. You'd know. If you're a regular prayer, before the days of apps, this is how everybody would know their prayer times. They would just know. Right? So for example, if Maghrib is at 9:23, see, I'm remembering this from the days that I used to look at prayer timetables. When Maghrib in London in the summer is at 9:23, the latest, which is the 21st of June, and then for a few days it stays, and then it starts to go backwards again. Before that day, it incrementally 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes. Now, depending on the time of the year, depending on where you are in the world, it may not be 2 minutes, it could be longer. But generally, wherever you are, you know what it's going to be. So you need to know with conviction that the prayer time has started. So you check the time and then you pray. You don't take guesses, 50-50, oh, I think it has, not sure, it should have started, Allahu Akbar. No, you have to know. And then second thing is even if you've checked, now you've checked the time, and your app is telling you a time, or your timetable is telling you a time, but you've made a mistake in understanding it, or the timetable was for another city, or the application wasn't calibrated right and it gave you a wrong time. Now you've prayed, you've taken the means, right? You're reasonably sure, based on your app, the time has started, you've taken the means, and now you've started, Allahu Akbar. And you've prayed. After prayer, you found out actually the time hadn't started. Right, so the second condition is that the time needs to have started. In that situation, you have to do your prayer again. It's not sinful upon you. You took the means, you prayed. There's no sin upon you. But there's no prayer for you. So you have to pray. So these two conditions, there's a small chart here. So the entrance of the prayer time, you need to know, belief it has started and must have started in reality. It must have started also. Number 6, the intention which is made in one's heart. So you need to know what you're doing and why you're doing it. What you're doing is you're praying. Somebody asked you, instantly you'd say, I'm praying. Well, I'm about to start prayer. And why? Praying for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm praying for Allah, my Lord. Now, if asked, answers with that hesitation. Now, sometimes, if I'm going to pray and I'm very, very thoughtless, right? I'm not in the zone. It's just, I'm just spaced out. And if somebody asks me, what are you going to do? And I'm like, I'm going to pray Asr, right? That's not an intention. Because if I had intended, it would have been it would have been at the front, at the tip of my mind. I would have answered it instantly. What are you going to do? Oh, sorry, I'm just going to pray Asr. Can you give me a few minutes? Right? So you're there. You're in the zone and you're there. So how we determine this is, can you answer straight away? If you can't answer, then you're absent-minded. There's no intention if you're absent-minded, right? You need to be focused. In a group prayer, must intend following the Imam. So if you're intending a group prayer, if the Imam's leading, your intention is, he's my Imam, and you don't need to specify who he is, right? Simple. There's a massive congregation. You can't see the Imam, but you know there's a congregation. You intend, I'm going to follow the Imam, Allahu Akbar. And you need to obviously know what prayer you're reading, what prayer the Imam's reading. Can recite a formulaic intention. Now you find, and some communities, they actually recommend this, is that they have a formulaic recitation of an intention that they speak out loud before they pray, right? So somebody might just go and say Allahu Akbar, that's fine. The intention's in the heart, you know what you're about to do. Whereas other people actually recite a formulaic prayer. Now there's no harm in that. Sometimes it helps you in reciting, right? It helps you in reciting. Sometimes absent-mindedly you can even say, Allah, I'm going to pray Maghrib. You've actually recited Maghrib, but it was a slip of the tongue. It was a slip of the tongue. You actually intended Asr, but you said Maghrib. We overlook that because the real intention is in the heart. It was just a slip of the tongue. And these formulaic recitations are done, as we mentioned, only to keep you in the zone. Now, if talking about being absent-minded, now if you leave your house, right, and the intention's in your heart, the mosque is at the end of the road, you've left your house and you're going to the mosque now. What have you intended in your heart? You've intended, I'm going to the mosque to pray. So the whole journey, there's an intent there. You go to the mosque and you go to the mosque, you haven't spoken to anybody, you go, even if you've spoken to somebody, right? Your mind is still focused on what you're going to do. You go and say Allahu Akbar, that's an intention. But if, say for example, I'm about to pray and then the phone rings and I'm like, I have a 30-second conversation and I'm absent-minded about what I'm doing and I put the phone down and it's like clockwork, right? It's like automation, an automatic machine. I'm just going through the motions. My mind was pre-programmed from before. I'm not in the zone anymore. I'm not thinking. And I just put the phone down, Allahu Akbar. There's no intention. In that situation, there's no intention, there's no prayer. Likewise, if I'm about to say Allahu Akbar and then I decide to wind my watch up. So now I'm focused heavily looking at the watch and without thinking, Allahu Akbar. There's no attention.